Welcome everyone to the first PSG and PGSG Immigration Attorney General's information session for the fall 2020 semester. As a reminder, this initiative was developed to increase access to immigration legal services by offering monthly virtual services free to both undergraduate and graduate students at Purdue University. Additionally, this session, like I said, will be recorded and will be uploaded on the Purdue Student Government's YouTube page for you to view again if you need any more clarification. This is a joint initiative with Purdue Graduate Student Government and Purdue Student Government, and we'd just like to give a special thank you to Purdue Legal Services, international students and scholars, the Burton D. Morgan Center for Entrepreneurship, and of course, the folks at Green and Spiegel for working with us. Everybody, in terms of Purdue students, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat. If you guys could please fill that out for attendance purposes, that would be great. Should be there. I'd just like to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Olivia Wyrick, and I'm the current student body vice president for Purdue Student Government. And I'm a junior studying natural resources and environmental science and political science. I'd also like to introduce Shannon Kang. She's the president of Purdue Student Government. She's a senior in political science with minors in statistics and Spanish, and she'll be taking notes for us this evening. Next, I'd like to introduce our wonderful attorney tonight, Jonathan Grode. He graduated from Temple University Beasley School of Law, magna cum laude in 2008. Jonathan serves as the U.S. practice director and managing partner for the firm Green and Spiegel. Jonathan has worked continuously in the U.S. business immigration law field since 1999 and has amassed considerable experience obtaining non-immigrant and immigrant visas for new company startups, professional workers, artists and entertainers, athletes, physicians, and scientific researchers. Wow, that's a bio. Welcome and thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who's on the call, who came, and we hope that we can help clarify any questions that you may have regarding immigration. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Jonathan.
All right. Well, I am super excited to be here. Purdue is like one of my all-time favorite places. I'm like a big fan of West Lafayette. So, you know, it's good to be here again for another year. Normally, I get to campus twice a year. I do a lot of work with the Foundry, a lot of the entrepreneurs, helping them out with stuff. And it's been a nice and natural progression to work with the student government and the student body association. So consider us a resource. And, you know, what Olivia, by the way, great name, that's my first daughter's name. What Olivia was alluding to is, you know, we're here to try to get you ahead of your immigration questions, to get you thinking pragmatically about immigration, and to offer solutions to your discrete situations. We have office hours that are available for Purdue students, and I think that there'll be a link set up so that you can register. Olivia, I don't know if we have that set up for this year yet, but that will be something that will be available. So although Olivia said, you know, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, try to keep them like more general in nature, just because we do have a mechanism available for you to talk about your specific situation. So yeah, with that, you know, I do want to reiterate that you guys are dealing with immigration probably at like the trippiest time I've seen in my 22 years of being in the field. Like, in all honesty, I have never seen it be so challenging. Whether it be, you know, visa processing, or whether it be just getting documents out of the government, processing employment authorization cards, like all of that stuff is just really, really, really challenging, time consuming, and you have to be ahead of the curve. You have to think about things in advance. So I know a lot of you are like, wow, the semester just started and here we are like talking about immigration. I mean, that's the idea. That's really the idea, because the reality is that if you don't think ahead, you can find yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to protect your status. And if your ultimate goal is to remain permanently in the United States, or at least, you know, get here and do a work visa after graduating, it's never too early to think about it. So, you know, with that said, what we like to do is solicit questions in advance and make this more of a town hall rather than like an educational session on the particular visa classifications. We do have other opportunities for that. Specifically, when I do visit campus, we generally run through your international and student scholars office, like kind of like an immigration basics. But this is more town hall. This is like what's on your mind, what's bothering you, and how can we help? So the solicited questions today, excuse me, I'm just trying to pull up my notes here, are some of them I will have to unfortunately defer to your internal offices. Generally speaking, anything about F1 status, curricular practical training, which is work whilst you're completing your degree, or OPT should be directed to your International Student and Scholars Office. So, when somebody says, can I graduate while on F1 reinstatement status? The answer is yes, but you should check with the school, right? Because that's not something I dictate, that's something the school dictates. Does that make sense, Olivia? Got it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. The next question we received was, how can I file taxes under my visa for work? Okay, so there's two questions, so I'll answer that first. If you are working on campus, you can get a social security number, or you can get something called an ITIN number, which is an individual tax identification number. You can just go to your local social security office, provide your immigration documents, they'll give you that number, and then you can file your tax return as any other resident. The next question was, what are the travel implications and duration of visas with respect to graduate degree or MBA? So traveling is a very specific thing, and you have to be careful. Certain offices or certain embassy offices and locations you can't travel to right now without getting a visa. Now, if you have an F1, there is a waiver where you're able to get around the travel bans that we see in the EU and India. But if you're on a different visa classification, that could be tricky. So you definitely have to check. You can always leave and re-enter as long as your visa is valid and your I-20 is valid. If either of those are invalid, you will need to take some action in order to be able to re-enter the US. A common question we get is, can I travel outside the United States if I have OPT? That's the work authorization after graduation. The answer there is yes, but again, your student visa must be valid and your I-20 must be valid. So that is really what you want to keep in mind when you're looking at travel as a student. The next question is one of those ones where I really can't answer it, unfortunately. Is there any specific method undergraduate students may use when applying for winter summer internships? That's a school thing. If you're talking about a CPT, you got to check with the International Student Office. They want to make sure that it's related to your field of major and what you're doing. So, that's who you should really be reaching out to. As an international undergraduate student, are international undergraduate students able to apply for Social Security number by attending an internship? Yes, but again, you're going to go to that local Social Security office to apply. As far as internship opportunities, I don't have anything there for you. I would work with career planning and placement at the school, and hopefully they'll have some leads for you. The next question is loaded. I could write like a 700-page book on it. In fact, I contributed 3 chapters to a book on this topic, but how do I navigate post-graduation visa status, the acquisition of a green card or citizenship? So loosely speaking, most foreign nationals are going to go from F1 to H1B. H1B is your standing working visa classification. You have to find an employer that's willing to sponsor you. The H-1B is oversubscribed. And what that means is every year there's a certain amount of H-1B visas that are issued annually, 85,000. They receive more than 85,000 people applying, so it goes to a lottery. Navigating that can be tricky. It can be really tricky. So you have to have a plan. And frankly, if you're doing an internship on your OPT, or if you're doing a year of work after graduating, talking to the employer early in the process about whether or not they'd be willing to sponsor you is a critical part of the process. The acquisition of green card is trickier. That's a transition from non-immigrant to immigrant. And again, in most instances, that requires sponsorship as well. So you really, if that's important to you, These are things to bring up when negotiating your job. These are fair, whenever you go in for a job interview and they say, hey, do you have any questions for me? Asking these questions is right, is proper. The last thing you want to do is like get to the end of your OPT or get to the end of your H-1B time and not be able to continue the process or continue to work. Citizenship is a different sort of bag. Once you have your green card for 5 years, then you're automatically eligible to apply for citizenship. So that is important. Can an F2 visa holder from Hong Kong work under the recently announced deferred enforcement departure by the Biden administration? So that thing is like quite muddled right now, and we don't have a ton of great information available as to how that is going to be utilized. But certainly, and I'm actually looking here. This to me was more of a directive. This is more of a directive that really just provides 18 months of protection. It came out on August 5th, and there was a memo issued on August 17th. So it's pretty new, You can get an employment authorization document, but it is sort of limited, and we are still waiting on further guidance. So I would check in on that, but it is a developing situation. I was just looking to see if there's any new notes on that program as I was talking, and I didn't see anything jumping out, but that doesn't mean it's not going to change pretty quickly. The next question is one that I really enjoy because I love. It says, how about getting married? Okay, so yes, if you marry a US citizen, you can obtain permanent residency. It's called a marriage-based green card. But the follow-up question is how does that work with an F1 visa? And that is a great question because your F1 visa is 100% non-immigrant intent, meaning you cannot have the intent to remain permanently in the US. If you get married and file a green card, you're displaying immigrant intent. And Olivia, they kind of are like oil and water, right? You can't go from like saying, I have non-immigrant intent, and then all of a sudden say immigrant intent. And there's like this bright line rule that says if within 90 days of arrival in a visa classification that requires non-immigrant intent, so in this case, you enter on an F1, and within the first 90 days after arrival, you get married and you file for a green card, the government can claim that you committed fraud upon entry. You did not enter with non-immigrant intent, you entered with immigrant intent. So the advice is if you wait 90 days post-arrival and you go ahead and file for an immigrant visa after arriving in a non-immigrant intent visa classification, going for that green card or getting married, you're okay because they don't question intent if it's more than 90 days after arrival. So that's pretty a nuanced kind of thing, but it highlights that you have to be aware of your visa classifications, the restrictions and limitations, and what permanent residency will provide. All right. And the next question is, can you explain the H-1B visa and the investor visa? What is the pathway to obtaining work permit in the United States after the F1? Yeah, so the H-1B visa is like your general working visa, as we alluded to earlier. It's predicated on a very simple test, which is, does the position require a degree in a specific field of endeavor? And do you have a degree related to that field of endeavor? If you have a degree in economics and you're going to apply for a chemical engineering position, you're not going to get an H-1B. So first things first, make sure that the job matches up. Secondarily, you have to make sure you're being paid the right wage. And the Department of Labor protects U.S. workers by ensuring that foreign nationals do not get paid less than foreign workers or undercut the U.S. job market by ensuring that they meet certain threshold wages. You can go to something called the Online Wage Library. You can just Google it. And you can look up what your position in a specific jurisdiction requires in terms of a wage. I'm putting this into the chat box for everybody. You can go to this link and you can like look up like what you should be making in an area of intended employment for your job. And then obviously, as we alluded to before, there has to be a number available. And what they mean by a number available is essentially that you get selected in that lottery. There are certain employers that are exempt from the lottery. Most notably, if you get a job at an institute of higher education, you're not subject to the numerical limitations. And that can be a very valuable thing to note when looking for a job. So like, you know, taking a smattering of public and private employers is not necessarily a bad idea, just because if you do get hired by a university or an institute of nonprofit research institution affiliated with an institute of higher education, you can circumvent the H-1B numerical limitations. So it's just one thing to keep in mind when you're looking for jobs. The question regarding investor visas is a little bit challenging to answer, just because there's an immigrant version of an investor visa called EB-5. And then there's also a non-immigrant version called an E-2. And then there's a new program called Entrepreneur in Residence, where if you've obtained a certain amount of venture capital money, you can get a visa classification that allows you to remain in the United States to direct and develop that enterprise for up to 6 years. The bottom line is, if you do want to consider doing something regarding entrepreneurship or investment, you have awesome resources on campus through the Foundry. But that would be a great question to have like a one-on-one consultation about, because it is very nuanced to people's specific situations. Okay. Next question. I am a senior and will graduate in May 22. My visa expires in July 22. What are the procedures I need to take if I decide to work an industrial job? And what are the procedures I need to take if I go to graduate school? I'm concerned about traveling internationally. You don't have to leave. That's the nice part. You know, prior to graduation, you'll apply for that optional practical training, which will give you a year of employment authorization. If you have a degree in a STEM field, then you can also extend that for an extra 24 months. You don't have to do anything with an embassy or consulate unless you leave the United States and seek to re-enter. If you're staying put, you're good. No worries. And in fact, if you decide to enroll in a graduate school, you don't need to leave either, because they can just roll over your I-20 to the new program. Again, that is one of those things where you would want to check with your International Student and Scholars Office, and they'll be able to provide you some additional guidance. The next question is, how can I check my current immigration status? So there's two places that you can go to. You can check your I-94 online, which is your like admission record, and it tells you what classification you were admitted in and how long you were able to remain in the United States. That's and I just put that link in there. And there's also the USCIS case status if you have something pending, and I'll get you that as well. That's the two places where you can check your status. But you know, it brings up a good point in that you can have a visa in your passport, but really what controls is what classification you've been admitted to and for what duration. All right, moving right along. What's the roadmap to go from OPT to green card or work visa? Well, we've kind of already covered this. For most people, it's an H-1B. There are certain visa classifications that are nationality specific, and these are based on bilateral free trade agreements between the United States and a foreign country. So for example, like if you're Canadian or Mexican, you can enter the United States under the USMCA, which used to be referred to as NAFTA. There's a bunch of different jobs and visa classifications that will qualify for a NAFTA visa. If you happen to be from Australia, there's a bilateral free trade agreement with the United States, which allows for quick access to employment authorization. If you're from Chile, there's a visa, and from Singapore, there's also a visa. So it depends on your specific nationality, but H-1B is your typical classification that you'll hold. And then the transition to green card will flow from there if the employer is willing to sponsor you. And that also kind of dovetails into the next question, which is what options are available for people wanting to work in the US. There's a ton of them. But again, those bilateral free trade agreements, the H-1B visa, and another visa classification called O1 for extraordinary ability, that's specifically good for like PhD scientists who have published a lot. That extraordinary ability is another option. So Olivia, in a nutshell, those are all the questions that we received. I know we got one here through the chat. It's from Sarah. I can't see the full name in the chat box, but Sarah, do you mind if I read your question out loud to the audience? Is that okay? While we're waiting for permission to share the question, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask at this juncture?
Jonathan, really quick, I'm gonna go ahead and just let everyone know I'm gonna shut off the recording.
Okay.
So the rest of the video will not be recorded.